Story number 1. This happened only a few months ago from the time I'm writing this. I work an overnight job at a warehouse. So, during the day, I'm usually home sleeping. I stay awake between 6 p.m. and around 9 or 10 a.m., even on my nights off, just to keep my body on the same schedule. On this particular night, I was at work until 4 a.m. When I got off, I headed straight home and pulled into my neighborhood around 4:15. The streets were completely empty. Silent. Just how I liked them after a long shift. But as I approached my driveway, I noticed something strange. There was a car parked directly next to it. Not in the driveway itself, but right beside it on the curb. I slowed down a bit, curiosity getting the better of me, and glanced at it as I turned in. It was an old black sedan with heavily tinted windows. Every window was pitch black. I couldn't see inside at all. There were no lights on, headlights, cabin lights, nothing. I pulled into my garage and parked, still eyeing the car in my side mirror. The layout of my neighborhood made this feel even weirder. The houses here are spaced out. There's usually more than enough room for anyone to park directly in front of the house they're visiting. So why park right by mine? I stood in my garage for a moment, watching. Listening. Eventually, I brushed it off. Maybe someone was visiting a neighbor. Maybe they were having a party, and the spots closer to their house filled up. Still, it bugged me. Just a little. Before going to bed, I checked out the front window one last time. The car was gone. The rest of the day went by normally. I slept until around 6 p.m., then started getting ready for another night at work. When I backed out of the driveway that evening, the sedan wasn't there. So, I put the whole thing out of my mind. That night at work dragged on. I felt more tired than usual. Maybe it was just one of those nights. But I kept telling myself it would be worth it. Tomorrow was my night off. Eventually, the shift ended. I clocked out and drove home. Once again, it was the middle of the night. And once again, the streets were completely empty. But when I got home that morning, the same old car was there. Parked in the exact same spot as the night before. I did what I had done previously, slowed down as I passed it, trying to get a better look through the windows. Nothing had changed. It still looked like an old black sedan. Still heavily tinted. Still completely dark inside. After pulling into my garage, I decided to do something different. I walked down to the end of the driveway, just to get a little closer. I wasn't exactly sure why. Maybe I just wanted to make sense of it. Or maybe I was hoping I'd spot something that would explain why it kept showing up. As I got closer, something flickered in my peripheral vision. It looked like movement, inside the car. Just a quick shift. A faint shape behind the dark window. Like someone adjusting their position or leaning forward. But it was fast. Barely more than a shadow. And only out of the corner of my eye. For a second, I wondered if it had just been a reflection. Still, I kept walking, but slowly. Carefully. I stopped maybe 10 feet from the car. That was as close as I felt comfortable getting. Even from that distance, I couldn't see inside. The tint was too dark. No movement. No sound. Nothing. Before heading back inside, I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of the license plate. Just in case. Honestly, I doubted I'd ever need it. But if this turned into a pattern, I figured it'd be good to have something on record. Better safe than sorry. I went back inside, feeling slightly uneasy. Just like the night before, I checked out the window about an hour later. The car was gone. Strange, definitely strange. But it wasn't like the car had done anything to me. It just sat there. Quiet and still. So, I didn't know what else I could really do about it. I made myself dinner, watched some TV, then went to bed around sunrise. I slept until sometime between 6 and 7 p.m. By the time I woke up, the sun had already set. Since I had the night off, I decided to take one of my usual long walks around the neighborhood. It was cool outside, quiet. Peaceful, even. And when I left the house, the car wasn't there. But when I returned, maybe an hour later, it was. Parked right there in the same exact spot. For the third night in a row. I mean, I had just walked the entire neighborhood. Maybe I saw 1 or 2 cars parked along the street the whole time. That was it. So why was this one car always parked right in front of my house? And why only at night? This time, I didn't stop 10 feet away. I walked straight up to it. I stood by the window and raised my hand to my forehead, pressing it against the glass to block out the reflection from the streetlights. I peered inside. The car was empty. No one inside. No movement. Nothing suspicious sitting on the seats or dashboard, no bags, no signs, no notes. Just empty. And yet, somehow, that made it feel even stranger. This wasn't something I could report. Whoever this was, they weren't doing anything technically wrong. It was just unsettling. I stood there for a few more seconds, then turned and went back inside. The first thing I did was grab my phone. I'd left it on my nightstand, plugged in, while I was out walking. As I picked it up, I noticed something odd. There was a motion alert from one of my security cameras. Now, just for context, I had a camera mounted on the front porch. But it only faced the door, so it would never go off unless someone was right up at the entrance. I also had 3 cameras inside the house. One in the living room, one in the hallway, and one in the kitchen. I kept them there mostly for peace of mind. The alert didn't tell me which camera had detected the motion. It just said there was a new clip saved. I opened the app and pulled up the footage. The clip was 60 seconds long. I watched it closely. For almost the entire video, the house was still. Completely quiet. No movement anywhere. At first, I thought maybe it was a glitch. Just the system freaking out. But then, right at the end of the video, something moved. It happened in the last 5 seconds. Quick. Sudden. Something darted across the very bottom edge of the screen. A blur of motion. Too fast to fully make out. But it had definitely moved. They were only in the frame for a fraction of a second. Just part of a head, and a shoulder. Barely enough to make out anything, but enough to make my blood run cold. Because the footage came from the camera in the bedroom I was currently standing in. I felt my hands go numb as I stared at the phone. The silence in the room suddenly felt overwhelming. My own heartbeat was pounding in my ears. I slowly turned around, scanning every corner, every shadow. They could be anywhere. Maybe even watching me right now. That thought hit me like a wave. My breath caught in my throat, and the panic fully kicked in. I needed to leave. Now. I rushed toward the doorway, trying not to make a sound. But the moment I stepped out into the hall, I heard it. Movement, coming from the bedroom. From right behind me. And then, footsteps. Heavy, fast, and only about 15 feet behind. I didn't stop to look. I didn't want to see who, or what, was chasing me. I sprinted toward the stairs, my legs fueled by pure adrenaline. Down the hallway. Through the living room. Straight to the front door. I burst outside and ran. I didn't stop. I didn't even think. I just ran straight into the woods behind my house. Branches scraped my arms. Leaves crunched beneath my feet. But I didn't care. I just kept going, deeper and deeper into the darkness. Eventually, I realized I could only hear one set of footsteps. Mine. Somehow, I'd gotten away. I called 911 from my phone as I crouched behind a tree, trying to control my breathing. By the time the police arrived, the car was gone. But thankfully, I had the photo of the license plate from the night before. That photo changed everything. It took them only 3 hours to find him. They arrested a man in his mid-20s. Completely disheveled. Eyes wide and empty, like something inside him had broken a long time ago. Honestly, I think if I'd turned around and seen him chasing me through my house, I might have frozen, or tripped, or never made it out at all. The scariest part? There didn't seem to be any clear reason he'd targeted me. But it was very clear he had. On his phone, they found dozens of photos of my house. Some were taken through the windows, at night, of me sitting in my living room. He had notes, too. Detailed records of when I left and got home from work. Every single day for the last 2 weeks. What's worse, we still don't know how he got inside my home. Or how he managed to move around without triggering the other cameras. If he had that level of awareness, that knowledge of the layout, there's a real chance that wasn't the first time he'd broken in. It might have just been the first time he slipped up. The first time he accidentally stepped into the view of a camera. I try not to think too hard about what might have happened if he hadn't. Either way, I shouldn't have to worry about him for a long time now. Story number 2. This happened 4 years ago, but I still think about it from time to time. It was storming pretty badly that night. Thunder, wind, sheets of rain, one of those nights where most people just stay indoors. At the time, I was working as an Uber driver. Stormy nights like that usually meant things were really slow. Sometimes, I wouldn't get a single pickup the entire night. Still, I stayed out. I'd either drive around the quiet streets listening to music, or park in an empty lot and watch YouTube on my phone. Even if I only got a couple rides, it was still extra money I wouldn't have earned sitting at home. And that night was exactly what I expected, dead quiet. Nobody was going anywhere in that kind of weather. For the first hour, I just sat in a parking lot, listening to the storm roll through town and scrolling on my phone. Eventually, I got hungry and decided to drive through a fast food place to grab something to eat. Then I went back to my usual spot and waited some more. That's when I finally got a notification. Someone had requested a pickup. I tapped on it, curious to see how far they were, and it said they were 25 minutes away. And their drop-off location? Another 20 minutes past that. Usually, when I get requests that far out, it's because no other Uber drivers are working. I might be the only available car in the entire area. But I had nothing better to do, and the storm had me too wired to sleep. So I accepted it and started the long drive. The pickup location was pinned on the map, a lonely spot at the edge of town. The drive felt endless. Maybe it was the rain hammering down, or maybe it was the fact that there were no other cars on the road. At certain points, it honestly felt like I forgot I was even working. It was almost like I was just drifting through the storm. It didn't help that the road the GPS took me down led way out into the middle of nowhere. I don't think I'd ever driven that far in that direction before. It was just dark fields, trees, and empty backroads. Finally, after what felt like 35 minutes, I arrived at the pinpointed location. It was right at the corner of 2 roads. But not normal roads. These were 2 cracked, narrow lanes intersecting out in the middle of literally nothing. No lights. No buildings. No signs of life at all. Just the storm. And that corner. Empty fields and tree lines stretched out on either side of me. Nothing but darkness and the rain tapping relentlessly against the roof of my car. More importantly, nobody was there. I double-checked the Uber app. It confirmed I'd arrived at the pickup location. Still, I just sat there for a minute, peering through the storm and trying to make sense of it. Who would be out here, in the middle of nowhere, during a storm like this? I waited another moment, then looked down at my phone and started typing out a message to the writer. I figured I'd ask where exactly they were. That's when I caught movement in my side mirror. Someone was walking up behind my car. Before I could even react, they opened the back door and got in. I had no idea where he'd come from. I hadn't seen him on the road, hadn't spotted him by the trees, nothing. It was like he appeared out of nowhere. He was completely soaked from head to toe. Rainwater dripped from his jacket onto the seat. His face looked off. Disturbed. Tense. Maybe even angry. "You order the Uber?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. He looked straight ahead and said my first name. That confirmed it. He was the right guy. So, I started driving. The silence in the car was heavy. A few minutes went by, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. For one, he was sitting dead center in the back seat. Not off to one side like most people do, but right in the middle. So every time I glanced at my rearview mirror, his eyes were locked straight into mine. He just had this uneasy energy. Like he was waiting for something. I wanted to ask why he was out here in the first place, why he was walking through the storm, alone, in the middle of nowhere, but I didn't want to push it. The guy already seemed tense enough. Still, the farther we drove, the more isolated it got. No houses. No lights. Just long stretches of road swallowed by dark woods. I figured maybe if I asked casually, it might ease the tension. So I said, "Hey, so what brings you out here anyway? I mean, with the storm and all." I tried to keep my tone friendly, almost joking. I looked up into the mirror as I said it. His eyes met mine. Then, immediately, darted away. He looked like he was about to say something. His mouth opened just slightly, but then he closed it again. He said nothing. His voice was low. I pulled over. The road we were on didn't have any buildings or houses nearby. Just trees and darkness. It didn't make sense, but whatever he was involved in, I wanted no part of it. He leaned toward the door, reaching for the handle to get out. But then I caught it, his eyes flicked down toward my phone, which was sitting in the center console between us. The Uber app was still open. He paused. Just for a second. Then, without saying a word, he pulled his own phone out and looked at it. In that instant, I knew. I knew what was happening. He'd just remembered that the Uber app had all his details, his name, ride history, pickup location, even where I dropped him off. If he had been planning something, anything shady, he realized he'd already left a digital trail. I saw it on his face, the sudden shift from tense confidence to a flicker of panic. He hesitated again. That's when I spoke, trying to keep my tone as light and non-threatening as possible. Don't worry. I'll cancel the ride from my end. It won't charge you, I said, hoping to steer his thoughts away from suspicion. I wanted him to believe that canceling the ride meant his information would somehow disappear. Maybe he'd think everything would be erased, and I wasn't paying attention. He just glared at me. His eyes were still cold, angry, and lifeless. After a few more seconds of hesitation, he finally opened the door and stepped out. He walked into the storm. Within seconds, the fog and rain swallowed him up. I didn't wait. I started the car and drove away immediately, before he could change his mind. Even though I didn't have solid proof that he was dangerous, I reported his strange behavior to the police right away. You just never know. Several days passed with no news. Then, I got a call I wish I never had to receive. Someone had gone missing that night. Last seen near the forest just off the road where I picked up the man. They asked me for everything I remembered. I gave them all the details I could. But no trace of the missing person or the man I picked up was ever found. The storm had likely washed away any tracks or clues before search teams arrived. To this day, they never found either of them. I was the last known person to see that man. And sometimes, I can't help but think I was lucky to make it home that night. Story number 3. This happened on what I thought would be a normal weekday. But it turned out to be anything but normal. It was early April, and rain was pouring down heavily. My job was a mix of indoor and outdoor work. So rainy days like this made everything 10 times harder. By the time my shift ended, I was completely worn out. I got off work at 6 p.m. and drove through the rain for about 30 minutes to get home. My house was tucked away in a rural part of town. As I pulled down my driveway, which had turned to mud from all the rain, I noticed something strange. There was a second set of tire tracks in the mud. It looked like another car had driven down my driveway recently. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was the mail truck or a delivery van. But when I got inside, I saw there was no mail or packages waiting for me. That seemed odd. Looking back outside, the tracks showed that whoever it was had pulled up to the house, made a 3-point turn, and then left. Maybe they had just made a wrong turn. I shrugged it off. Inside, I peeled off my soaked work clothes. Then I headed to the kitchen to make a quick dinner. It was about 7:30 when I thought I heard a knock near the front door. I say, thought, because it was just a single, soft knock. And with the rain falling so hard, it was hard to hear clearly. I got up from the living room and walked toward the front door. When I opened it, I was hit by a blast of cold rain and wind. But nobody was on my porch. I looked around for a few seconds, but there was no one in sight. I quickly shut the door to avoid getting soaked. It was probably nothing, I told myself. I went back to the living room, where I had been watching a show and scrolling on my phone. Nothing really happened for about an hour. Then I got up from the couch to use the bathroom. As I stepped out of the bathroom, something caught my eye. There was a mark on the floor. It looked like dirt or mud. It stood out because the tile floors were white. I knew I hadn't worn my shoes inside, especially not muddy ones. And I was confused why I hadn't noticed the spot before. It was right behind the couch. My couch faced away from the spot since the TV was on the far wall. I grabbed a rag and wiped it away. Still, the whole thing felt strange. Maybe it was just one of those little mysteries you never solve. Something meaningless you forget about and move on from. But part of me wondered if someone else had been in the house. Even so, I felt like I was just scaring myself over nothing. I used the bathroom and then returned to the couch. I'd be lying if I said I forgot about the mark. The feeling was different this time. I had a bad gut feeling. I kept checking over my shoulder, like I was being watched. It was that same uneasy feeling you get after watching a horror movie. With the couch's position, the hole downstairs was behind me. That feeling made me really uncomfortable. Eventually, I turned off the TV and went upstairs to my bedroom. At least there, I could lie in bed with my back against the wall. I had a small TV in my room, so I just continued my night there. About 20 minutes passed, and I was finally starting to feel more comfortable in my room. I was just beginning to forget about everything when I suddenly heard something outside my bedroom door. I'm not exactly sure what it was. It sounded like a muted thump, maybe a footstep or something hitting the wall. Whatever it was enough to make me feel unsettled all over again. I got out of bed and walked over to the door. I pressed my ear against it and listened carefully. There was nothing. I stood there for a moment, trying to gather the courage to open the door. I told myself I needed to check and make sure nothing was going on. Slowly, I opened the door and looked down the hallway. It was empty and quiet. If I wanted any chance at a peaceful night, I knew I had to check the rest of the house. The only other room upstairs was the spare bedroom, a rarely used library and storage space. I started walking toward it when suddenly, the TV downstairs turned on by itself. I could hear the show I had been watching earlier blaring at full volume. My heart burned in my chest, panic rushing through me. I sprinted down the hallway and ran downstairs. The whole floor was dark except for the flickering light coming from the TV. I turned the corner into the living room, unsure of what I'd find. But nobody was there. I cautiously walked over to the TV, scanning the room as I went. I pressed the button on the back and turned it off. Was this just a glitch with the TV? Or was something else going on? All the strange things that had happened that night started to add up. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen for protection. Then I began clearing every room in the house. I should have called the police right then. But honestly, in that moment, it didn't feel like it would help. They wouldn't have arrived for at least 10 or 15 minutes anyway. I cleared the entire first floor. Throughout the whole search, I never found a single thing wrong with the house. After that, I quietly walked back upstairs. By this point, I was starting to convince myself that this was just a string of unusual but meaningless events. I reached the hallway and crept open the door to the spare room. I hadn't been in there for a while, and everything looked the same, until I noticed something lying on the floor near the closet. It was the TV remote for the one downstairs. Blood rushed from my face. I backed away and ran downstairs, then right out of the house as I called the police. When they arrived, they found a few other signs that someone had been inside. There was a broken lock on one of the downstairs windows. Most likely, whoever it was had visited earlier that day while I was at work. They probably drove down my driveway and knocked on the door to see if I was home. When they realized I wasn't, they left, only to come back later and break in. They stayed inside the whole night, quietly lurking around. Maybe they really were watching me the entire time. Just thinking about it still sends chills down my spine. When I went upstairs to my bedroom, they must have grabbed the TV remote. And obviously, they turned it on to distract me as I was walking toward the spare room where they were hiding. That gave them enough time to slip out of the house. It's almost 100 times creepier that nothing was taken, and there were no clear signs of what they were even there for. Hopefully, if anything else happens, I'll still be around to update you.